thank you all. Thanks to the organizers. So thank you for joining today. And so, yes, so today I would like to talk about a particular Humean view, which is a more radical version than the standard Humanism. It's called the Superhumanism. It was developed by the philosopher of science and physics, Michael Asfeld, who is based in Lausanne. And this version of Humanism is more radical than the standard one because it has a much more parsimonious ontology with only propertyless matter points which do not have any intrinsic properties. So many objections have been raised against the Superhumanism, and all these objections do not really target the parsimony per se, rather the coherence of claims made by Superhumeans regarding the fact that Superhumanism is a naturalistic, a scientific, realist view, empirically adequate, and so on and so forth. And here I refer to works by Wilson, Lazarovich, and also I wrote 2 papers on this. So in this talk, I would like to discuss with you whether it's really the case that Superhumanism is a scientific realist view. And my claim is that actually it is not, so it's an anti-realist position. And I will further argue that we should actually regard this anti-realist position as a fictionalist position. And this is why I will call it a Super-Humean fictionalism. So the plan is the following. First, I will just briefly talk about Superhumanism and also say why Superhumanism is not a scientific realist thesis, despite what they argue. And then I will try to locate Superhumanism in anti-realist spectrum, and I will try to argue that Superhumanism is a fictionalist view. But then I will also discuss to what extent it's an anti-realist view. So just let me say briefly what Superhumanism is. As I said, well, it has a very minimalist ontology based on a maximal principle of parsimony, according to which we should get rid of everything from our ontology as long as the ontology can still be empirically adequate. So it's based on 2 different axioms. So the first is that we have a distance relations that individuate matter points or point-like objects, and that why the matter points are permanent, the distance relations between them actually change. And so what about properties like spin or charge or mass or objects like the wave functions? Well, they do appear in the laws of nature, but they are regarded as just dynamical parameters that they do not actually reveal ontological properties. And so all the other properties that are not particle positions are banned from the mosaic. So in this regard, we can actually consider Superhumanism as a kind of a thesis that is in line with anti-structural realism and the primitive ontology approach. So according to anti-structural realism, individuals are actually individuated not intrinsically by some intrinsic properties, but relationally by some distance relations. And then according to the primitive ontology approach, our primitive ontology, which in this case are these matter points, provide the minimal complete basis upon which all else supervenes. These matter points are also the building blocks of which everything else is mereologically composed, and also doesn't have any intrinsic properties. And also it's simply there, which means that it's not introduced in the theory to account for the dynamics of the ontology, but it's the ontology itself. So according to Superhumanism supporters, this is a scientific realist stance. And not only that, but it's also the strongest one because it can actually resolve 2 important threats to scientific realism. The first is the pessimistic meta-induction argument, and the second is the argument from underdetermination. So according to the pessimistic meta-induction argument, well, the succession of very mature theories but actually that turn out to be false should actually lead us to conclude that we are not legitimized in actually inferring the ontology from our best theories and think that the theoretical terms appearing there have some ontological content. according to the underdetermination argument, the data that we have, the observational data that we have, actually can be explained by multiple theories that are all empirically adequate and maybe empirically equivalent. And so we should not feel legitimized in believing in the truth of any of these theories. But how can superhumans respond to this? Well, they say, look, what changes or what is underdetermined is just the formulation of the laws, but not the ontology, because these laws of nature that figure in these different theories tell us the story about the very same ontology, the primitive ontology of matter points. So of course, I take this to be a normative claim rather than a descriptive claim, because I don't think that when James Clerk Maxwell was actually trying to draw the mechanism of the ether, was actually thinking that it was actually ultimately describing particle motions. But then the problem is that, okay, if I take this to be a normative claim, and so that this is a kind of, interpretation of what actually happens in science according to the Superhumeans, then it seems to me that the Superhumeans want to introduce a gap between the laws of a theory and the ontology. And so my first suspicion here is that actually Superhumanism can resolve these two arguments, because it has a particularly strong metaphysical realism, but not that is endorsing a scientific realism. What does it mean? Well, it has some commitment to some particular ontology, but this is not the ontology to which we are guided by science, or that it's revealed by science. Indeed, if a theory is a change and laws a change, but actually the ontology remains the same, how can it be that it's science and scientific laws that reveal what our ontological commitments are? So I take this suspicion to be plausible prima facie, but I want to investigate step by step. So there is a prima facie argument that Superhumians can give me here, and they can say, well, look, we are scientific realists because we believe in matter points, and matter points are theoretical entities, and this is enough to have a scientific realist view. However, I don't think that actually they are going to argue in this way, for two different reasons. So the first is that they claim that this scientific realist or naturalistic stance comes from an attentive reading of the theories. The second is that it's entirely not clear that they take the matter points as theoretical entities. There is just one passage in the book by Esfeld and Deckert that says it so, but otherwise they actually motivate the commitment to matter points by saying that all experimental evidence is evidence of discrete objects, and so particles, from dots on a display to traces in a cloud chamber. And so it really seems that if we endorse maybe a kind of lax or relaxed definition of observational entity, observational terms, matter points can actually be regarded as observational rather than theoretical. In any case, in my talk, I'm kind of assuming that being a realist about some theoretical entities, and so being committed to the existence of some theoretical entities, is not enough to save scientific realism. In order for this commitment to be scientific, one must be committed to those theoretical entities in virtue of or because they figure in the most successful theories, okay? And not for some kind of like armchair metaphysics or observational results. Good, so before proceeding further, let me say what I take to be scientific realism. I take it to be the conjunction of these three different theses: the metaphysical one, according to which there is a mind-independent reality out there which is investigated by the sciences; then the semantic one, according to which we should literally interpret the scientific claims about the world, including theoretical claims, so they should be interpreted at face value, and also that all scientific claims, including theoretical claims, have truth values. And thirdly, this epistemological thesis claims that, well, the theoretical claims also, as well as the observational claims, constitute knowledge of the world because they provide us with some kind of privileged access to the world. So let me say first, why is it that humans, standard humans, can't be realist, and why I take humanism to be a fully fledged scientific realist view? Well, remember, in the standard view of humanism, laws of nature are formulated in a joint carving language, in a fundamental language. And then it's the job of physics to reveal to us what the natural properties are, and so what the carving language, the joint carving language is. Moreover, and I want to stress this further, it's thanks to the fact that the laws are written in this fundamental language that actually the system to which laws of nature belong can be really said to be the best, and they really have this objectively privileged status. Why is it? Because when we have to judge which of the system is really the best, we have to judge its simplicity. But then if the language of the laws of nature were not the fundamental one, then the simplicity would be mere syntactic. It was just a matter of counting the predicates. But in order to judge the objective simplicity, and so what is the objective best system, it's not just a matter of counting. We have to take into consideration the language in which, the simplicity is evaluated. And so it's only because the laws are written in joint carving language that they can actually have an objective status of a lawhood that clearly indicates an objective superiority with regard to other kinds of generalities and regularities. So then in the end, the Humeans can be truly said to be realist because they believe that there is a mind-independent reality out there that is being investigated by physics, and then that we should literally interpret the predicates appearing in the laws of nature, and that actually it's really these laws of nature, because of their status and their objective privilege that they have, that can provide this privileged access to the world, to the mind-independent reality. But then what about superhumanism? Well, this is the problem, that superhumanism wants to have a simplicity in the best system because they endorse the best system account of lawhood on one hand, but also they want to have parsimony in the ontology. But then, as Esfeld and Descartes really say clearly, well, simplicity in the ontology and simplicity in the representation pull in opposite directions. If you have a very parsimonious ontology like the one they have with just a matter of points, then you're going to have a very complex lawhood system. So in order to have both, you need to have this connection, this gap between the laws and the ontology. So laws use the language that is mostly convenient in terms of simplicity, and not the one that carves nature at its joints. And so even though we have mass and charge in the laws, even though theories talks about electrons and neutrons, we actually do not have them in the ontology. This means two things. It means that it's not possible to literally interpret the terms in the laws or to infer the nature of the word from the language used in the law, but also means something else, that we have lost an objective status of a lawhood, of laws of nature, because simplicity here, it's just a fake, it's just a matter of counting, regardless of the language. And so what about these three theses? Well, we do have some metaphysical realism. We definitely do not have a semantics. And what about the ontology? So here, the epistemological thesis seems to be not to be preserved, okay? But I want to investigate this third kind of thesis a bit further. Why is it? Well, I think that the epistemological thesis might represent some kind of a problem here of in comprehension between me and the Superhumean. So let's investigate it further, and let's think that I say that the mass of an electron is such and such kilograms. Well, one option would be just to discard that the Superhumeans actually are committed or respect this third epistemological thesis within Superhumanism, because strictly speaking, this epistemological thesis involves literal interpretation of the scientific language used, okay? And so you say, well, you tell me that the mass of an electron is such and such, but look, there is no such a thing as mass, there is no such a thing as an electron, and so this theoretical sentence claim does not give us any privileged epistemic access to the word. But then, of course, this line of thought can be resisted. It can be resisted because the Superhumeans, keep claiming that the truth of theoretical claims entail truth of observational claims. And so that the truth of the sentence that the mass of an electron is such and such should actually be able to entail some truth in, for instance, particle measurements. So then, I kind of grant that this epistemological access could be achieved even without a kind of literal interpretation of what mass or electron is. But then I want to say it a bit clearly. I mean, what is it, the meaning of being an electron, or, being massive? I mean, if we really want to recover this kind of third epistemological thesis, and probably at least partially recover scientific realism, then I really would like to hear more what's the meaning of being a massive or being an electron. And I call this the problem of interpretation. The challenge is to provide a meaning. And here I want to stress this idea of semantic clarity. I take it to be extremely important if we want to keep the epistemological thesis and to partially restore scientific realism. And this is because I take this to be really the point of divergence between a scientific realist account and a pragmatist account. Even pragmatists find theoretical claims to be significant. Of course, they are significant, but they are significant even though they are semantically unclear. And this is because they ground the significance of theoretical claims in their utility in science. So then if I ask, well, what do humans mean, superhumans mean by being a massive, or, by wave function, then it seems to me that in their papers, in their works, there are two different approaches. One is to take them as uninterpreted predicates that have no meaning per se, and the other is to take them as interpreted predicates that have a clear meaning. In both the cases, these predicates, however, they supervene on the particle trajectories from the beginning of the universe until the end, and so they get their values fixed only at the end of space-time. So even for the initial condition of the system, we cannot specify them until the end of space-time. However, there is this deeper difference. So in the first route, according to the first kind of approach that I see in their work, these dynamical parameters are just useful in order to account or to compute particle trajectories. They are totally not ontologically significant. So it seems that they kind of treat these dynamical parameters in the same way, for instance, Bogle and Parry treat the wave function, or in the same way Lewis treats chance. But then this means that these dynamical parameters don't have any meaning. And if they have some meanings, it's just because they inherit them by being bridged to sentences with the clear meanings, okay? And of course, if they take this route, the epistemological thesis is not recovered. So what about the second route? Well, recently it seems to me that the Superhumians actually are opting for this second route to save some kind of scientific realism. And then they say that properties like mass or charge, or predicates like being massive or being charged, actually refer to certain particle trajectories. And so they reduce and they refer to some particle trajectories. So then my position is, okay, if this connection is clearly spelled out, then I would consider epistemic thesis is preserved. So I was kind of pushing this idea a little bit forward and kind of push them to show how we can be eliminativist, how we can say that when we use the term mass, actually the meaning of mass is some kind of trajectories, okay? But this probably it's unfair, it's impossible. And so indeed, the Superhumeans take another route. And they take another route by being functionalist and say and endorse some kind of analytic functionalism, not properly speaking analytic functionalism, but by saying that actually the meaning it's actually of something is what it does, okay? It's not what it is. So this kind of strategy, we find it in Lewis and Jackson work when they try to locate pain in the physical state, such as in C-fiber firing, okay? So then what they try to do is to solve what I called the problem of interpretation by solving another problem, which is the problem of function. What is the function of predicates like being massive, or properties like mass, spin, or charge? Well, if they can answer this question, then according to them, they could give a clear meaning to these terms, but also establishing something more, establishing a sort of identity between theoretical predicates and the primitive ontology, and locate them in the primitive ontology in such a way that when we say what is a mass, then mass is in the primitive ontology. And when I say that I believe in the wave function, actually the wave function is in the primitive ontology. And this would also allow them to really support the idea that the truth of sentences about mass, charge, or spin entails the truth of sentences about particle positions, and to actually defend this identity according to which being massive is actually having particular trajectory, in the same way being in pain is actually having some sort of neural state. But let's see how exactly Lewis and Jackson do this. Well, according to them, these mental terms that they want to reduce, then they abbreviate actually descriptions of physical states, such as what occupies such and such a role, okay? So then these descriptions are individuated by the functional or causal nexus, which is very specific. And in virtue of this, then mental states are physical states, and we have this kind of identity. So let's take, for instance, a pain. Pain is the state that typically is induced by damage or danger of damage to tissue that results in feelings of self-eating, crying out, etc. If you define in a functionalist way C-fiber firing, then you have exactly the same description. It's the state that typically is induced by damage, and so on and so forth. So then in virtue of being exactly in the same causal functional nexus, then you can say that pain and C-fiber firing are the same thing, and they are identical, and that truth about pain and the truth about C-fiber firing. But how do superhuman functionalism works? Well, the only thing that they tell us is that, well, their role that they play is that in accounting for the change of matter points relations, and that dynamical parameters are introduced through a functional definition that describes causal or functional role for the behavior of the entities in the primitive ontology, and that this dynamical parameter has the means to describe the change in the particle position in a manner that achieves the best combination of being simple and being informative about the change. But is this enough? Well, what I will try to argue for is that this is not the clarity, that semantic clarity that we were looking for to preserve the third epistemological thesis. It might maybe solve the problem of function. It does definitely not solve the problem of interpretation. So why is it so? Well, first of all, because of course we have in any case to wait until the end of space-time in order to give, a particular kind of a functional meaning. And then the problem is that, I mean, how can we establish a causal nexus between the whole space-time, like the whole trajectories of all matter points from the beginning until the end? And with what? I mean, what is the causal nexus here? I mean, we have, this whole space-time, but how are we going to insert it in a causal nexus with something else, with some, so that's really why I feel a little bit puzzled. And also I have a third motivation, which is that, well, look, we have so many different, qualitatively different properties that here we need to explain, to give meaning to, right? Being a mass or being charged. But then in the end of the day, all these properties would reduce to the very same kinds of space-time full of trajectories, okay? So they would have all the same functions in kind of explaining these particular trajectories. Also, I think that there would be a problem because if we endorse this kind of a general functional approach to theoretical claims like theoretical predicates like being massive, then the problem is that we will not be able to actually distinguish genuine properties or genuine features of the theory from actually non-genuine ones. What I mean here, well, here I take this quote from Scheffler, which talks about globification. So imagine that I ask you, why is it that water has cooled after being placed over a flame for a while and then removed? And then you answer me, oh, it's because the water had initially been deprived of its globification through action of the flame. Removed from the flame, it has become increasingly globified again, and so on and so forth. Then, of course, you are inserting globification here to explain why is it that water has cooled after being placed over a flame and then removed. But this, of course, it's not a genuine property. In order to actually show that this is a genuine property, you need to tell me exactly what's the causal nexus and also to being testable, empirically testable. So then why is it, well, I think I sufficiently argued that superhumanism cannot be regarded as a fully fledged scientific realist position. Here I will try to approach superhumanism from an anti-realist approach and see exactly how I can better give a kind of framework to superhumanism. So, of course, we have so many different frameworks to choose, right? We have instrumentalist, a fictionalist, we have a pragmatist approach. So which one? Well, I would like to choose something following this criteria. So we do not want an eliminativist attitude, otherwise superhumanism would be in great troubles. Then we want it to be closer as possible to a realist stance because superhumans wants to be scientific realist. Then we want something that allows that the truth of laws and the truth of the particle dynamics. And here I think I'm in danger because normally we think of anti-realist position as denying the truth, right, of laws or scientific theory, but we will talk about this later. And then I would like something to preserve their strong metaphysical realism and also to give some kind of epistemological access to some extent because they want and they need this epistemological access, but also something that gives us semantic clarity. So here I propose the view of fictionalism, which is definitely compatible with the metaphysical realism and can also be regarded very close to scientific realism. Actually, there are some philosophers of science like Mauricio Schwartz who claim that the two views fictionalism, scientific realism are perfectly compatible. So what I do not want to talk here is ontological fictionalism, okay, according to which we should just pretend that something exists, like a God exists, or mathematical entities exist. What here I would like to talk about is Humane fictionalism, which is a term introduced by Varty in 2012, and that really refers to the Humean stance that there is some fiction about some aspects in the laws of nature. Okay, so there are some aspects featuring the laws of nature which are just a fiction. And of course, why is it Humean? Because David Hume was exactly being a fictionalist about causation. Then I still have to really investigate how Lewis is inserted in this. I know that Lewis, of course, talks about fictionalism, but I don't think that this is the kind of Humean fictionalism we want to hear, but probably from Lewisian works I can draw or something. So, but this I'm not sure. So then, what is a superhuman fictionalism? Well, we said that the Humean fictionalism takes some features of laws to be fiction, but actually superhuman fictionalism takes all the ways in which laws of nature structure reality to be fictions. So the fiction lies in the laws, in the structure that they attribute to reality. Okay, so it's exactly how the ontology is structured in the laws or by the laws that is fictitious. So then they claim that our structuring activity provides some complex concepts such as mass or charge or wave function to represent the world of experience in the laws. And this is because we want the laws to be simple, but in this kind of pragmatic simplicity, okay? But this is not the nature of things. So here we have really on one hand, these laws that kind of represent reality, but still they do not reflect reality exactly as it is itself. And I will talk about this later. So what does all this mean, however? I mean, we might, be feeling lost here, because we were really talking about the meaning, right, of predicates like being massive, and here it seems, okay, is it just enough to say that they are, fictitious? Well, so non-eliminativist fictionalists are happy with the language of laws because they are simple and they don't want to eliminate, they don't want to reformulate. But then what does exactly this mean, like being fictionalist about structuring activity mean? Concerning the meaning of these predicates like being massive. Well, so some non-eliminativist fictionalists argue that fictions have no meaning and they have no truth, and then they are instrumentalist. But some non-eliminativist fictionalists argue that meanings of terms that we should be fictionalist about, so in this case, mass or charge, etc., remain the same as usual. So we have truth, and that we have also truth inside the fiction. So we can still have a literal interpretation of their meanings because this is what their meanings are. And we can still talk about truth, but this truth is within the fiction, of course, okay? Yet we can say that the truth within the fiction entails the truth of the word, the truth that we really care in this word, meaning the veridical truth of the word, not the word of the fiction. So the first option is really far away from scientific realism, so I propose to Superhumians the second option. Okay. So then there is this kind of literature within the philosophy of science, and particularly within the models, which was initiated by Schwartz, which really claims that fictionalist about models is still a kind of, can be regarded as compatible with scientific realism, because we have to rely on the notion of inferential expediency, in the sense that models, even though they are fictions, allow us to make inferences and predictions on our reality in a more efficient way. So if we are going to actually take tools from this kind of literature, then it means that we can also apply this maybe with laws, but here it's just a tentative. And so we could say, okay, well, the structure of laws as fictions allow for, expedient inference making from the fiction to the target system. And then the conclusion we arrive at by means of such inferences are empirically testable. And then we can say that the structure of laws still represents the ontology, but not reflects it. Okay, so we were saying before, because there is no reference or denotation, but this representation is in terms of this inferential conception, right? And so the notion of entailment is preserved. So I'm still working on this because it seems to me a little bit like mysterious. I think that we should first really establish a much better relation between the laws of nature and the meanings of the terms in the laws of nature and their truth with actually our primitive ontology and the truth about the primitive ontology in order to justify this inferential conception. So we do have this kind of expedient inference making because I think, or in virtue of some kind of connection which is prior to this and that links the fictional world to the realist world. But the literature that here I'm proposing is not really interested in this a priori, in this connection. So they are just happy with saying that the fictions represent the ontology and that the two are connected in virtue of this inferences that we can make from the laws to the target system. What I would like to say and to add is that within this framework and within the particular framework of a superhumanism, it seems that these fictions are actually indispensable, and this kind of fictions that do not actually clearly represent in the sense of reflection or denotation the physical world, our primitive ontology. And this is because actually the regularities in the world are so to say parsimonious, so they don't have, so to say, colors, okay? And so it's extremely difficult to, for instance, identify regularities in such a world. It's extremely difficult to systematize them without this kind of fictionalist structure, okay? And so this fictionalist structure of laws is somehow compulsory. It's forced upon us. Okay, so suppose that you are this Super-Humean, which really believes in this very parsimonious ontology, then you are really forced to endorse this fictionalist attitude and to really go for something in your laws that do not exist in reality, okay? And this is especially true because the mosaic you have to systematize is really from the beginning until the end of time. Then another thing that is important to stress is really the attitude within this scientific fictionalist approach to laws of nature, according to which, well, the fiction should be taken very seriously. So you would not be able to pursue any progress in science if you didn't pretend that the fiction were true. It would be extremely irrational not to pretend that it is true. So it's really like a kid playing with his hobby horse, and then the kid really believes that the horse is a true horse, right? The kid has really the same attitude to the horse. In the same way, it would the kid would have the same attitude to the true horse, right? And so here we have the very same kind of cognitive attitude. So probably we can say that these two attitudes are pragmatically indistinguishable, but they are actually not really the same one because, of course, of our tradition of linking belief to truth, etc. But in any case, they are indistinguishable. So we can say that they have the same, that they are the same cognitive attitude. So, okay, let me wrap up. How did I go so far? Well, where did I go so far? Well, so if we look at the three theses that I was presenting you in the very beginning, so the metaphysical, the semantic, and the epistemic thesis, well, we can say that, okay, the metaphysical thesis is totally preserved. So we have this mind-independent world that's investigated by science, and actually scientific laws allow us to make predictions or to make inference, and that the truth of, and yeah. Then we have the semantic thesis, according to which the terms of our laws of nature should be interpreted literally at face value. However, of course, you should not commit to their existence, and this is really the problem, that really the element here that pushes us away from the scientific realist attitude. And finally, we have this epistemic thesis, right? That science gives you this privileged access to reality by allowing inference making and by allowing entailment. Good. So this is my conclusion. So I hope that I convincingly argued that superhumanism is not a scientific realist theory, as the functionalist strategy of superhumans is not sufficient to restore it. Then I hope that my proposal of going for superhuman fictionalism is actually feasible and appealing. And third, that I kind of convinced you that the superhuman fictionalist is not that far away from a scientific realist view. And so here I have some reference, but let me thank you all for your attention, for organizing this wonderful workshop. I also would like to thank Christian Lopez for some email exchange and an audience of the University of Bern. Thank you very much.